How do? My name is Andrew Hancock and I am a VMware technical architect from Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. I have worked with VMware since their birth in 1998, so that has been over 24 years I've been working with the VMware product catalogue. Some of my close colleagues may say, if you cut Andy in half these days, it reads VMware like a stick of rock from Blackpool Pleasure Beach. I have now written 130 articles and recorded 10 hours of VMware vSphere videos for Experts Exchange and received 41 Experts Exchange awards over the last 10 years working with the Experts Exchange community. I am currently the overall #1 point earner in the Hall of Fame at Experts Exchange. I am honoured to have been accepted into the VMware vExpert program since 2011 and more recently a VMware vExpert Pro for the last 3 years.
And welcome back to another VMware Hancock's half hour. And what we're going to do today may actually take us about 30 minutes, so bear with because we've got quite a lot packed into this video today. And what I'm going to show you is how we add some shared storage, a lump of shared storage. In this video we're actually going to add some NFS storage, which has become, I think, quite popular, certainly in the last 20 years. Many years ago we were doing iSCSI, we were doing fibre channel, and NFS it's certainly been around a lot longer than those, but certainly has some performance and simplicities when adding it to VMware vSphere. And I was just actually looking back, and if you dig into my Experts Exchange profile, which I must admit is fairly long, if you look at the very bottom of the profile, I did a video tutorial back in 2011. In fact, it was June 2011. So 11 years on in 2022, I'm still doing VMware vSphere and I'm still doing video tutorials, and that adding an NFS datastore to VMware vSphere ESXi 4.x host server was done in Flash, and it could still be there on my blog, possibly if you click it. I don't know, I've not even clicked the link. Hang on a minute, shits and giggles, let's just click the link, and yeah, but as you can see it is actually Flash, and that Flash plugin probably looks like it's actually broken on the server. It's not delivering Flash, but Flash is gone anyway. So 11 years later, it's really actually time to start looking at NFS storage and shared storage. And if you've been following these videos, in the last video I actually turned around and said we're going to start getting to the nuts and bolts of shared storage, so that we can actually start looking at things like vMotion and VMware HA and clustering, and add some more hosts into our cluster here. So without further ado, I'm just going to big X out of that Andy's world, and we've got our trusty PowerEdge R730. It's all powered on, you can hear it in the background probably, noisy thing, and the keen-eyed amongst you will notice that we've updated this ESXi host to 7.03D, which came out 3 months ago, and I've got videos that show you how to do that via ISOs, direct from VMware, or using VLCM. So I'll post those in the description so you can have a little look back at how we do that. Interestingly, since I've done the update this afternoon, I've now got a little information warning that says system logging is not configured on host ESXi 007. So we'll maybe spin that one out to another video, and we'll come back and we'll have a little look at what's triggered that now. It wasn't there before the update, but it is there now. So something has changed. So we've got a lot to do, and I'm going to sort of kind of summarise how we're going to do this. We've got our Synology DSM 7.1 NAS. It's a virtual NAS. I think for labs, homebrew, testing, I don't think there's anything wrong with actually using DSM 7.1 in a virtual lab. I don't think I'd actually use it for production, but I'll leave that thought with yourself. So that's our lab that I showed you in the last, that's our NAS that I showed you in the last video, how we vMotioned it, although it was cold migrated in the end because of EVC and because of issues with the VM itself and the VMware tools not exactly working to standard. So we've now got that in our lab. And I was just going to show you here that this is how we left it, and it was actually working correctly, and it has actually picked up IP addresses in the lab here, which are 192.168.182.107. Has picked one up from DHCP, so is working. So I've just created a FQDN. I'm not going to say any more about FQDNs, so I can easily access it, and I'm going to log in. So I'm going to show you a number of things to do with Synology. And Synology NAS is now quite popular. We've been using them here for certainly over 10 years or more, from when Synology were little startups, and they have progressed. So we have a few Synology NASs in the lab, and we have some virtual ones as well. And we actually think they're very good for production, very good for backups, and very, very good for testing these little labs that we do virtually. So I'm going to show you a number of things that we're going to do today. We're going to create a storage pool. We're going to create a volume on the storage pool. This is on the Synology NAS. We're then going to change the IP address on the Synology NAS. We're then going to change the network that the Synology NAS uses to a dedicated storage network. We're then going to create a new vSwitch on our ESXi host. We're going to create a VMkernel port group on that vSwitch, which is completely dedicated to storage. Then we're going to change the networking that the NAS uses, and then we're going to add our NFS datastore, and then finally we're going to migrate a virtual machine off our SSD datastore onto our NAS datastore or NFS datastore, and then we're going to power it up. So without further ado, and bear with, and again, you know, if you don't actually understand anything I'm doing, or I'm going too fast, then please put it in the comments, drop me a message, open up a question on Experts Exchange, and I'm most happy to discuss at length. So the first thing that we want to do, and I will try to slow down. I'm not going to edit this video, so if things go wrong, and I'll have to fault find them as we go. So we're about 7 minutes in already, so I'm going to have to speed up. So the first thing we want to do when we actually log into our Synology NAS is we want to go to Storage Manager. And Storage Manager actually gives us a representation of the number of disks that we have in our NAS, and I can have 12 disks in this NAS. Yours will look something similar. I already have a storage pool, storage pool 1, volume 1. I don't want to use that because that's a single disk, and what I actually really want to show you is if you are actually doing this on a production system, then you do actually want some resilience. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to create a new storage pool. Now Synology is quite easy, I think, because it's wizard driven, does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So I'm going to click next. Now you can choose here. I would generally recommend RAID 6 or RAID 10 depending on your workload. I only have two 1 terabyte disks in this NAS, so I'm going to go with a RAID 1 which needs 2 disks and which will tolerate 1 drive failure. Now all this is virtual, so some of this really is irrelevant because this isn't actually a physical NAS, this is a virtual NAS. So I'm going to click next. Okay, so one SATA disk there, 1 terabyte, another SATA disk, so we just drag and drop over here and I click next. If this is a production system, a real system with real physical hard drives, then I would actually perform a drive check. This isn't, it's virtual. There's no point checking virtual disks, they should work. They shouldn't have any bad sectors, so I'm going to click next. I'm happy, RAID type RAID 1, SATA HDDs, drive 2, drive 3, estimated capacity 1 terabyte, and I'm going to click apply. Okay, all the data is going to be erased, I'm happy with that. So there's our storage pool 2. Now that's our storage pool, that's just a lump of RAIDed disks, that's a RAID array of 2 disks. So now to use it, I actually want to create a volume. So I'm going to create, there's my storage pool, and I'm actually going to use a chunk of 500 gig out of that 1 terabyte storage pool. I'm not going to give it a volume description, I'm just going to click next. btrfs is the recommended filing system to use in Linux. If you have a particular reason to use ext4, then please use ext4. btrfs actually gives you a lot more functionality in terms of replication and snapshotting, folder quotas, advanced data integrity protection, etc. As you can, I'm just reading here. So recommended. So I'm going to just click next, and I'm going to click apply. Shouldn't take too long. So now that's formatting the disk, formatting the RAID array with the btrfs file system. So that's healthy. So that's some of the preparation done already. You may have already done that on your Synology NAS. If you've got a brand new Synology NAS, then that's how you would provision storage. So let's just drop back to our ESXi 7 host, where we're now going to basically start doing some configuration and creating vSwitches. So if we select configure, followed by VMkernel adapters, and if we click add networking, we can add a vMkernel network adapter. Now a vMkernel network adapter is a special port group that handles all the traffic for ESXi services, host services, host traffic. So services like vSphere, vMotion, iSCSI, NFS, Fiber Channel over Ethernet, fault tolerance, vSAN, host management, etc. are all vMkernel network adapters. You normally have a default vMkernel network adapter which handles management network. You can see it just grayed out there. So we want to create a new vMkernel network adapter. The reason why we want to create a new vMkernel network adapter is because I want to create and send all my storage traffic over a specific network which is not my production network. So if I just click cancel here, so this is my production network 192.168.182. that's where all my virtual machines, that's where my host management goes over. As you can see here, I added a vMkernel network adapter in the last video so that we could basically do some vMotion. Now I'm going to leave that there for a moment because later on we'll need to create some new vMkernel adapters for when we actually bring in the other hosts in some later videos. So it's best practice really to send your storage traffic over a dedicated storage network, either using a physical network and physical NICs or using VLAN. So what we're going to do in this lab is that we're going to send the traffic over a specific network interface in our lab. So back to add networking, I want to create a vMkernel network adapter, followed by next. I want to create a new vSwitch, and I'm going to use jumbo frames on this vSwitch. So a jumbo frame is anything larger than an Ethernet frame of about 1500. So 9000 is usually a figure that we actually give to the MTU or the jumbo frames. Followed by next. I'm going to add a network adapter. So I've got VMNIC1, which is connected to my network at the moment, and it's connected to another switch which is going to run my storage. Followed by next. Now I like to call my port groups names, so I'm just going to call it vMkernel NFS Storage. I'm going to get the MTU from the switch, and I'm not going to run any other services on it, so I'm going to click next. I do want to use an IP address for this, so I'm going to go with a 10.10.1.1 with a subnet mask 255.255.255.0, and I'm going to call the the NAS, I'm going to give that an IP address of 10.10.1.200, followed by next. So we're creating a new standard switch, vSwitch 1, VMNIC 1, a physical NIC in the host, switch MTU jumbo frames 9000 with a new port group of VMkernel NFS Storge, followed by its IP address, followed by, I'm going to click finish. So if we look at vSwitches, this is the port group, this is the vSwitch that we've created, and this is the VMkernel port group that we've created on it as well. So all the NFS traffic from our NAS into the host is going to go over the 10.10.1.1 network, and it's going to go out that physical port group. What we also need to do as well is we need to add a virtual machine port group also on this switch, so that traffic can move from the VM. Remember our virtual NAS here, lab NAS, that's a virtual machine. So the traffic needs to transverse a switch or to go between the NAS, the virtual machine, and the NFS Storge VMkernel port group. And the reason I've actually used a physical adapter is because when we add our other two hosts, they'll be sending their traffic out of their VMkernel adapter into their physical adapter, across the physical switch, back into this physical adapter, back into the NAS. So I'm just going to click add networking, and I'm going to create a new port group, and I'm going to call it NFS Storage Network, followed by next, followed by finish. So here we go now. This is our virtual machine. This is our virtual machine port group. It has an IP address. Sorry, this is our VMkernel NFS storage port group. It has an IP address. A virtual machine port group does not have an IP address. Traffic basically just comes through that port group into the switch. So that's our networking done on our host. So let's flip back, and I hope you're following. There's a lot to get in here, lot to get into the brain, because we're doing networking, we're doing storage, we're doing changes to vSwitches, we're doing changes to VM kernels. So I'm going to drop back to our NAS, and you can look at the control panel, and I want to show you the current network interfaces that are currently assigned. Your network interfaces will look different. So LAN 8 192.168.182.107, that's our management network into the NAS, so we don't want to change that interface. If I just drop back to our virtual machine and I look at and edit the settings, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to disconnect network adapter 1, and I'll show you quickly. If we go back to our Synology NAS, you can see that it's disconnected. So I know that that's the network that I want to choose. That's a network interface. So I'm going to change the IP address. I'm going to give it a static 10.10.1.200. There's no gateway on our storage network, and there's no DNS server, and I'll set the MTV value to 9000. Some of your settings are invalid. Let's just revisit that MTU manually issue we got there. It could be because the network is currently disconnected. So I'm just going to go back to our NAS in our virtual machine, because it's a virtual machine, remember. I'm going to reconnect that back to the network. I'm going to go back to our NAS, this should come back and say connected, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to set the MTU manually, and it was that, look. And now I'm going to set 9000. So what we've done there is we've set a static IP address on our LAN 1 interface on our Synology NAS, and we've allocated an MTU of 9000 so it can be jumbo frames. One final thing that we need to do, and what I'm going to show you for shits and giggles here, I'm currently connected to ESXi 007 via SSH, and I showed you some of these commands before, ping and VMK ping, so I'm going to show you them again now. So I'm going to ping the interface 10.10.1.1, and that's the VMK2 interface on our ESXi host. So I'm hoping that if I ping 10.10.1.1, we get a response. Good. So the host can ping itself effectively. So there's a couple of other changes that we need to make. So we need to ensure that the storage network for the NAS is connected to the NFS Storge network as well, followed by OK. So if we actually go back to our host, our SSH connection, and if I try to send a packet out via the VMK0 interface, it's going to fail. There's no way that traffic to the NAS on 10.10.1.200 is ever going to get there via VMK0. You can do the same thing via VMK1, VMkernel 1, send traffic out VMkernel 1, 10.10.1.200, and if I just go back to these V switches to show you, so this is VMK0, it's on our 192.168.182 network. VMK1 is on 192.168.182.182 network, and VMK2 is on our 10.10 network. So if we go back to our SSH connection and we send a packet out, hopefully it responds. So that proves we could use ping, but it's not clear by using ping which interface that traffic is actually leaving to get to our NAS. It must be the VMK2 interface, because there's no way that traffic is going to reach that NAS using these networks. So we've, just to recap, we've added 2 1TB disks to our NAS, we've created a storage pool, and we've added a 500 gig volume. We've configured our NAS with a static IP address of 10.10.1.200, and we've created our VMkernel NFS Storge vSwitch and our NFS Storge network for our virtual machine, and we've made the modifications on our virtual machine so we have connectivity, and we've proved this by using VMK ping, and we can actually add a -s, which is size of packet, followed by 9000 to confirm that we can actually send a jumbo frame size packet over that network between the two. So that confirms that we've got proper storage traffic configured, and the traffic is actually going from our ESXi host at the VMkernel interface to the NAS, and it's returning correctly. So finally, we now need to enable the NAS to start talking NFS. So the first thing we need to do is to go to our file services, NFS, enable NFS. We want to use NFS 4.1, which is the latest incarnation, latest and the greatest version of NFS, and ESXi hosts support NFS 3 and NFS 4.0, 4.1. NFS 4.1 definitely performs a lot better, so I would actually go with NFS 4.1, and we click apply. So our NAS is now running NFS protocol. We now want to create what it calls a shared folder. So I'm going to say create a shared folder, and I'm going to call it VMware VMs. I'm just going to cut and paste the description, and I'm going to select our volume 2. I don't want to enable a recycle bin, followed by next. I don't want to do any encryption, so I'm just going to say next, and I don't want to enable any of the self-healing or quotas, and I'm going to click next, and I'm going to click next. I don't want to apply any permissions there, and I'm going to click apply. So we've created a VMware VMs share. What we now need to do is to make some alterations on that share for NFS permissions. So what we often refer to it as an NFS export. We often refer to shares in Windows, network shares, CIF shares. NFS we often regard things as NFS exports. So I'm now going to click create, and I'm just going to add the IP address for the moment of our single host, 10.10.1.1, read write, no mapping, sys, and I'm just going to click save, followed by apply, save. Now, one thing you need to remember here, we'll just go back, is our mount path. So I'm just going to see if I can do a control and C on that. So our mount path is volume 2 VMware VMs, as I've spelt it there. So I'm going to go back here to our ESXi host, and I'm going to click actions. I'm going to click storage, new data store. Here we've got 3 options. VMFS, I've showed you how to create a VMFS data store on a disk way back in part 1 and part 2, part 3 and 4, when we created our ESXi host. So now we're going to concentrate on NFS. So I'm going to create an NFS data store on an NFS share over the network. So followed by next. And we want to use NFS 4.1. And I'm going to go with the default. So I like to name my data stores. You can call them what you like, but I like to call mine NFS underscore, and I'm going to call this lab NAS. So that's the name of the data store that's going to appear in the inventory. Now the folder, that's that mount path that Synology was talking about. And our server, you can use FQDNs. You just have to ensure that your DNS is really, really good. Obviously, if your server cannot resolve the DNS name, it won't mount the NAS, and you won't be able to start your virtual machines. And I have seen organizations that use DNS, and their virtual machines are DNS servers, and their virtual machines aren't running DNS, and therefore your host can't resolve. So I like to use, in this particular occasion, IP addresses, and of course our server IP address, we go back over here, is 10.10.1.200. I've granted access to the export to 10.10.1.1, and followed by next. I'm not going to basically get into the complexities of using Kerberos authentication for the moment, so I'm just going to say don't use, and I'm just going to accept the defaults. Followed by next. So NFS 4.1, data store name NFS underscore lab dash NAS. Our server is 10.10.1.200. Our folder is volume 2 VMware VMs. Read write Kerberos is disabled. And if we sort of kind of quickly go back to our SSH connection, then we can ping the server there. So hopefully, fingers crossed, if I've done everything right and click finish, you can probably see here down at the bottom there, create NAS completed. So if we now go to data stores, we can see we've got a new NFS Lab NAS data store. That is our shared. I'm just going to create a folder, test folder EE. If you get the permissions wrong, a couple of things will happen. Either you won't be able to mount the NFS data store. If you do mount the NFS data store and you crank it a test folder, then you've got an issue with either access or root squash is not set correctly. So our NFS data store is mounted. I've created the test folder. So final function is to show you how we use it. Now I could just create a new virtual machine, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we migrate. So I'm going to click migrate, change storage. So this isn't really a storage vMotion because the machine is actually powered off. This is a cold migration, but we're migrating from local storage on the host to shared storage on our NAS, followed by next. So I'm going to select our NFS Lab NAS storage, followed by next, followed by finish, and hopefully there we go, it's going to start copying the virtual machine. So I'm going to let that tick away, carrying on in the background. I'm just going to complete a quick summary of what we've done in 37 minutes. Probably would have been 30 minutes if I hadn't waffled on for the first 7 minutes of the video. But anyway, okay, so Hancock's half hour, Hancock's VMware half hour is overrun by 7 minutes. So there was a lot to pack into this, and I really wanted to show you, rather than just quickly showing you how we mount an NFS data store on a Synology NAS, I really actually wanted to show you how we add a disk in a RAID array to create our storage pool, which was RAID 1. We've then created a volume on our storage pool, and I created a 500 gig storage pool. So that gives us 500 gig of space that we can expand into, and I can show you later on how we expand into that and how we expand and what differences that's going to make. We've then looked at configuring a new vSwitch specifically for our storage network using a 1010 address range, and there we created a new VMkernel port group with a static IP address, and we configured it for jumbo frames. I also created a virtual machine port group, which we selected in our NAS, so our NAS can actually send traffic out via that specific network. We then looked at configuring our Synology NAS for jumbo frames and adding a static IP address of 10.10.1.200. And then we've come back to, and then I actually showed you via our SSH connection that we could verify that the networking piece that we've done is all communicating correctly. So then there should be no reason at all, if you follow this process, when you actually get to adding your NAS, you should be confident that going forward that all the communication is in place, all the network is in place for you to easily add that as an NFS data store. And then finally, which is happening at the moment, you can see that my first Linux virtual machine is on ESXi 007 _ local 1 _ VMFS 6, which is our SSD data store, and that's currently being migrated in real time. Machine is offline, so this is a cold migration onto our lab NAS, our virtual NAS, which the machine's also hosting as well. So I'm going to just let this tick on in the background. I'm just going to basically turn the cam off, turn the mic off, and I'll come back at the very end and I'll power it up, and you can see that we've not broken anything. So I'll be back in a ticky. Catch you later. Okay, and I'm back. Okay, I just wanted to quickly show you, it's disappeared again. There's a resource monitor function within Synology, which I just quickly showed you. As you could see, it quickly ended after the transfer had been complete. So anyway, there's my first Linux virtual machine. It's currently on a different data store, which is the NFS NAS. So I'm going to power it on, just to show you that it does power on and it is working. And we can have a little look here at the graphs in Synology. Resource monitor at some small amounts of utilization whilst it powers on that virtual machine. And if we just look at the summary here, if I launch a web console, and you can see that that server's booted already. If we're lucky, I can remember the password. I'm just thinking it probably wouldn't have been root, so I'm going to try again. If this password doesn't work, I have no idea what it is. I'm just gonna one more go at that. I've no idea. I've forgotten it. Anyway, okay. So it does go to show that our storage is working. We have migrated our 30 gig thin provision virtual machine to our NFS lab. So again, thanks so much for watching. Come back and have a little look at the other parts I'm going to do, because this is where I'm going to start adding a couple more hosts to our cluster. So we'll have 3 hosts in our cluster, and we can then actually basically start adding the NFS storage that we've created to them, and we can start looking at how we enable HA, how we do DRS, and how we do some storage migrations, and how we do some vMotions as well. Anyway, so again, thanks so much for watching. You will take care out there, and I will be back soon. Thanks very much.